We all know the key to making power. Junkyard LS, cam, springs, and boost, right? But can we get an all-motor combination to compete against the turbo combination? It's Turbo 4.8 against 498. In this video, we got a cool shootout. On one side, we got your typical Junkyard 4.8. You know, cam, springs, good-sized turbo. On the other side, we've got a big block-sized 498-inch Super Stroker. The question is, who makes 800? Who makes a little bit more? And who costs a whole lot more? Before we get to the results, let's take a look at our test motor. Our test motor number one, 4.8 liter, typical junkyard deal. Now we did a few things to it. We installed new head gaskets, changed the ring gap, put ARP studs in it. We also put valve springs and a stage 2 turbo cam from Brian Tooley Racing. Now naturally it had big enough injectors. I think these were 80-pound deck injectors, and we had a Holley standalone management system. But if you discount the management system, the turbo system, including the motor and everything, we probably got about $2,000 or $2,500 into it. Now we picked a Summit T6 S475 turbo, but there are a lot of other combinations you could use. If you only wanted to make right at 800 and just get there, you could use that GT45 eBay turbo. You could also use the VS 7875 is a good combination. That's a proven deal. That works really well. Or another T4 S475, anything like that. That's those kind of turbos like the VS Racing deal or the S475. You could do 1,000 horsepower with that stuff. That works really good. That's the combination on the 4.8 side. Now let's take a look at the combination on the big block sized 498 combination. Now that basically had the best of everything. We threw everything at that. It had an RHS block. It had a forged steel crank, forged rods, forged pistons. It had kind of the best of everything. It had full CNC mast LS7 heads. You know, it had the LS7 rockers on it. It had a valve spring package. It had basically the bottom of the catalog, bottom of the page catalog. Still had a hydraulic roller comp cam in it. It had the mast split CNC ported, which looked awesome and did well. It had their cool intake, the 4500. It had a 1050 Dominator carburetor on it. We used an MSD ignition controller to control it all. You know, like I said, it just had basically everything. There was no expense spared in this thing, and as a matter of fact, I was kind of surprised once we totaled it all up. This was well over $20,000 worth of stuff. So if you were going to duplicate this motor, that's what it would cost. If you were to duplicate the 4.8, it'd be closer to $2,000 or $2,500. So there's a big spread. You're talking about 10 times the price for this all-motor deal. Now it's super cool, and as we'll see with the results, it makes big power. But the question is, is it that cool? Is it 10 times cooler than the little 4.8? That's something only you guys can decide. But let's take a look at the results and find out how they did. We've gone over both of our test motors. In one corner, we have the super giant, colossal mammoth 498-inch stroker LS motor, which actually, after I did the calculations, this whole time, for years and years after I built this motor, I've been calling this thing a 498. Maybe it sounds better, maybe if it rolls off the tongue better. The reality is it's actually a 495. So even though I used it in the title and everything as a 498, just because it sounds better for 4.8 and 498, technically it's a 495 with a 4,185 bore and a 4.5-inch stroke. So we've got that super colossal build-up, and then in the other corner we've got this diminutive little 4.8, the smallest LS in the LS family, and it came from the wrecking yard. But obviously it has a little something extra in its corner. It's got a superpower in the form of forced induction on the turbo. So we're going to start off with, this is a 4.8 from the wrecking yard. The only thing that we've done is we've obviously changed the ring gap and we put head studs in it and stuff just to prepare it for boost. But it is a bone stock one, stock cam, stock crank, rods, pistons, all of that stuff. The only thing we did is put a Holley HP management system on it. It's got long tube headers on it. Open throttle body, Mazir electric pump, so no accessories. And this is pretty typical of what they make. I've run dozens and dozens of these because I like to go get them from wrecking yards, because you know the only thing better than my first LS motor is the next LS motor that I get from the wrecking yard. So the 4.8 in stock trim without any boost or anything on it, made 333 horsepower and 343 foot-pounds of torque, and this is kind of what they do. So what I want to do is start off with comparing this to our mammoth, like giant, super expensive stroker. So let's take a look and see what happens when we compare this to our, this is our 498, actually 495. And as you can see, it makes a ton of power. It makes over 800 horsepower. The big stroke, big bore, lots of cylinder head, intake manifold. It has all the things that it needs to make a lot of power. So it made 810 horsepower and 725 or 6 foot-pounds of torque. So it's doing very well. You know, it's got high compression, it's got lots of cylinder head, lots of camshaft. Although this thing probably could have taken even more camshaft. I just selected the bottom of the page for the available hydraulic roller stuff for comp when I built this, and it's doing really well though. It sounds pretty awesome and looks pretty cool. It's got the big Dominator on it, the big single plane. So it did well. This is the comparison with the stock 4.8, but obviously that's not the end of our story. So we'll take a look at this. Now it's time to jump over to putting the turbo stuff on our 4.8 and let's see if it can whittle its way back up to the power output of the naturally aspirated 498. After taking a look at that big massive 498 stroker, and I keep calling it the 498, I know it's a 495, but 498 just sounds so much like there's so much more, there's 3 more. So after taking a look at that big stroker compared to the diminutive little stock 4.8, that's hardly a contest. But now we're going to do stuff to improve the 4.8, and since we are nowhere near the budget of that big motor, we've got a lot of room to work with. So this is our stock 4.8. And here's what happened after we installed a Stage 2 cam from Brian Tooley Racing. So you can see the camshaft held mostly at the top, and this is definitely something you're going to see with a cam that's this big. I'll go ahead and put the specs up on the Brian Tooley cam. But I think honestly, if it were me and this was a street car, I'd pick a Stage 1 for a 4.8 because I think the Stage 2 stuff is probably too big. But this cam was a 605 588, 226 231, and a 113 plus 4. So honestly, like I said, for a 4.8, unless you're going to drag race it and put a high ram on it and rev it out to 8,000 or whatever with a turbo, a Stage 1 cam I think is a much better choice. I like this stuff a little bit on the mild side. But this cam worked good and it makes lots of power. And remember, this is a turbo cam that we ran NA, and every cam is an NA cam just like every cam is a turbo cam. And this is what it did. So I want to talk to you a little bit about making these modifications to the 4.8 before we add boost. And the reason that we do that is because when you put a camshaft in, and let's say in this case our cam picked up from 330 to 409 or 410, so let's call that 70 horsepower. So if you pick up 70 horsepower NA, when you add boost, it could be 100 or even 150. So the gains can be multiplied under boost. So if you're running boost on the motor and you put a cam in it, the gains are going to be like exaggerated. So you're definitely going to benefit from putting the cam in. It's not just the power output of the cam, it's that multiplied by the boost. So it's always going to work out better. The other thing it does is on a stock motor, the stock cam is the power curve is gonna fall off at the top. Like after 6,000 RPM, it starts falling off because it's a mild cam. If you put a cam in it, you're also gonna have more RPM to play with. 6,500, even 7,000 in the case of these little 4.8 liters, because you know they have to rev to make power. And if you put any cam time in them, all of a sudden they want to make power at a higher RPM. And that works out okay, especially on the track. You know, at the drag strip, RPM obviously is your friend, and it's going to help the car go faster. So that's why we put a cam in it before we add boost. And when we add boost, obviously even better things happen. So now let's find out. Let's take this camshaft, our cammed 4.8, see if we can't take the fight to that 498, 495. This is our modified 4.8 liter after we had the Brian Tooley Racing Stage 2 turbo cam in it. And it's doing well, but what it really needs is some boost. So in this case, we added boost from a Summit It's a T6 based S475 turbo, but there are a lot of other turbo choices you could use. You could get close to this with that really cheap $163 eBay GT45, or a VS Racing 7875, or a normal T4 S475. Any of those combinations will work really well. So let's find out what happened when we installed the Summit Turbo. So first thing we did was run like 8 pounds. So obviously, hey look, it's much more sporty now. It's over 600 horsepower and over 500, around 570 foot-pounds of torque. Yeah, we're doing good, 610. So what do you do if you've got a turbo and you've got more boost left? Yeah, turned it up a little bit. And all of this was run on the turbo is run on E85, so it's important to note. And on the NA motor, on the big motor, on that 498, it was all run on race gas because it had high compression. So here's what happened when we stepped the boost up even more. So we're getting close to that 800 number. We're at 780 or so, 779. So it's doing good. That's at about 14 pounds. Now let's take a look at our final run. So we turned up to 16 pounds, just to, you know, give that little kiss over the 800 mark. And there we go. So we're looking at 828 horsepower with the turbo 4.8 liter. It's doing really good. Obviously that's, and we're going to compare that. We're going to compare that next to the big motor, to the NA motor versus the 4.8 versus the 498. So we're over 800 horsepower with this turbo motor. That was easy. There's lots more left. That turbo will support probably 1,000 horsepower or close to it on this combination because there would be very little back pressure on a 4.8. So we could go up even further. We've got, you know, we don't want to show all of our cards. We got to hold a little bit. Let's take a look now at a comparison between these final numbers and the 498. See who wins. Okay, this is our 4.8 liter from the wrecking yard with the Brian Tooley Racing Stage 2 turbo cam in it. And let's take a look. We're going to compare that to the big bad boy, the big huge 498 stroker, and I keep calling it a 498, and I'm going to keep doing that. Just forget about it. I'm never going to go back to 495, even though that's the real displacement. So here's that 498, and it's huge and it's big and it makes a ton of power, and it's an all motor deal, and a guy spent more than $20,000 building this motor, and he thinks it's the baddest thing in the world. And this little 4.8 down here, this is a guy like Matt, Matt over at Sloppy. He's driving his Granada or his Fairmont with a 4.8 swap in it, but he has a little surprise for this guy. Look, oh, it's added a little bit of boost. Oh, that's probably not enough because I'm only making 600 at the tire. Uh-oh, or I'm only making 600 horsepower. Here, let's add a little bit more. Oh, look at that. We're making almost as much as this $20,000 like big giant stroker. But, you know, what does a guy like Matt do? Here, let's take a look. Hey, let's add a little bit more. The difference is that Matt's not going to stop there. He's going to go to the all of it boost, whatever that turbo will do. But this is all you really need. I mean, this was 16 pounds on a 4.8, and all it is a cammed 4.8 with, you know, a cam and springs and boost. And this one had an intercooler, obviously, which I like running on any kind of turbo application anyway. And I also like doing ring gap, and I know a lot of guys don't do that, but they should. But this is all it took. I mean, you're talking, this is probably $2,000 or $2,500 worth of Junkyard 4.8 and associated turbo and intercooler and plumbing and stuff. I mean, it's stuff that most guys throw together for nothing. And so, yeah, and then I like the all motor thing. I think that was really cool. It was really fun building a stroker that's that big. It's amazing that you could get almost guys have done over 500 cubic inches from an LS platform, and that's big block size motor. The problem is, though, that it's really cool to do. It's like a stack injection system. It's really cool to do, but it's also really expensive and kind of problematic. And it just doesn't make anywhere near the power, and especially near the power for the amount of money that you have to spend for a Junkyard Turbo, which is why all of that stuff is so like prolific, which is why everybody is doing it, because it's cheap, it's easy to do, they already know what the formulas are, everybody out there's done it, and you put almost any cam in any LS, a 4.8, 5.36, or whatever it is, any kind of junkyard motor, put a cam in it, and you put boost on it, and you can do whatever that turbo will do. So if you have a 800 horsepower turbo like that GT45, it will do that. It probably won't do it on a 6.0, it would be better on a 4.8, but if you have an S475, it'll do 1,000 horsepower, then they'll do 1,000 horsepower. If you have two of them, that's 2,000. You know, if you can get the thing to hold together, you can make like crazy power right now with for next to nothing and doing very little. That's why these things are so popular, and that's why guys like doing them more than they like building these gigantic like 500-inch LS motors. So again, I like that. That's cool and probably has its place. But if I compare the 2500 versus the 25,000, it's no contest. Okay, guys, this will be real quick. What did we learn? Did we learn that a 4.8 from the junkyard with a turbo is really the way to go? We kind of already knew that. But what was cool is, I mean, I got to build a 498-inch 495-inch big block size stroker, which is cool that you could make something that big out of an LS platform. You know, it was the tall deck block and everything, so it was super cool, and that was great. But the reality is that now with things the way that they are, you can go to the junkyard, you can pick up these cheap turbos, and you can make such crazy power that it makes building that kind of you have to really want to build that kind of motor. I mean, the only reason to do that is if there was a racing class where you had to go all motor and you're trying to do crazy stuff. But even then, you wouldn't build something that big. You'd build this thing like the guys from Sam do, you know, a 440-inch motor that revs to the moon and makes over 1,000 horsepower. So this was a cool kind of gee whiz deal, and I really liked it. But really, if you're going to make power, and especially if you're going to make power on a budget, there's no better way. Go to the junkyard, put cam springs on it, put some kind of turbo on it, and it works out great. Thanks for watching, guys. Make sure to like, share, subscribe, ring the bell, and I'll keep doing this crazy stuff and building these crazy $20,000 motors and comparing them to $2,000 motors. Thanks for watching.